Let me introduce Dr. Gail Christopher first, and then when we come up, I'll introduce Monica Helsop just briefly. Dr. Gail Christopher is an award-winning social change agent and former senior advisor and vice president of the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropies. She is the visionary for and the architect of the WKKF-led Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation effort for America. TRHT, as we now know it, is an adaptation of the globally recognized Truth and Reconciliation Commission model. TRHT evolved from a decade-long WKKF America Healing, Racial Equity, and Racial Healing Initiative designed and led by Dr. Christopher. Over the last 10 years, she has had responsibility for several other areas of foundation programming. These include food, health and well-being, leadership, public policy, community engagement, and place-based funding in New Orleans and New Mexico. In August of last year, Dr. Christopher left her leadership role at the foundation to launch the Maryland-based, and I'm going to mispronounce this likely, Ntianu Center for Healing and Nature, and to devote more time to writing and speaking on issues of health, racial healing, and human capacity for caring. She is currently chair of the board of the Trust for America's Health and a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. Let me introduce to you Dr. Gail Christopher. Dr. Christopher, please come up.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, and thank you, all of you, for leading this work here in what is one of my hometowns, Chicago. We don't often have several hometowns, but if you live long enough, you can say that. And I figure once you've been in a place at least 20 years, you can call it a hometown. So. Again, it's a joy and an honor to be here. Our time is limited, so I'm going to try to make some very critical points. First of all, I want to thank the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, its leadership for embracing a commitment to racial healing and racial equity, and it has done so over the last 30 years. The president of the foundation, LaJune Montgomery Tabron, and the board of directors remain committed to this work, and one of the reasons is because our founder, the founder of the foundation, he said, do what you will with the money as long as it helps children. And the foundation board realized back in the 90s that most of the children in America are children of color, and most of the children are growing up in low-income or impoverished conditions. And the determinant of those conditions is the continuation of our belief as a country in a hierarchy of human value. Now that's a nice, gentle way of saying racism. Because you know, when you say racism directly, most of the people either turn off or they leave. But actually, this particular ism, racism, is, I believe, the defining ism of our country. And it has to be done away with. We have to say no more. So, Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation evolved from the lessons that we learned, the foundation learned decades before I arrived and the decade that I was there. It evolved from all of that to a place where we think we developed enough insight to say, let's try it this way. But I'm very clear when I say, let's try it this way. It is not cooked, right? It is a framework that communities embrace and do it in ways that make sense to them. And we tried to create the framework in such a way as to facilitate that kind of local creativity and ownership. There have been many truth and reconciliations around the world, well over 40. They've been spawned after conflicts and wars. They've been supported by organizations, by legal mandates. But this will be the first one in the history of humanity that was created by philanthropy and spawned essentially by philanthropic partnerships. So 25 years from now, if history does write about this, this is one of the things that will distinguish it. It came from and through and with the philanthropic sector. Literally, philanthropy is about the love of humanity. That's the literal etymology of the word philanthropy. But because it begins in philanthropy, that's just for not just, but it's primarily a vehicle for giving and receiving the funding to support it. But the heart of TRHT is in the community. It's in people doing the work at the grassroots level in communities. Now, I want to do as much as I can to inspire, and I'm going to share with you something that has inspired me dramatically, two things. First of all, I became a grandmother 3 weeks ago. Now, some of my colleagues say, you know, you should put a picture of that baby up when you say that. But trust me, I've shared enough pictures. But his birth reminded me of the truth. And the truth in Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, the truth is that we are all extensions of the divine. Do you hear me? We are all an extension of divine love. We are all equal in our value and our worth. And if you ever doubt that, hold a newborn in your arms, and you will be reminded of the divine and perfect nature of love. So that really renewed my inspiration to say, we have a barrier to understanding that reality. We have a barrier to understanding that truth and acting on that truth. And that barrier is the residual fallacy from the 16th century that humanity can be divided into some sort of structural hierarchy, and some people can be at the top of that based on how they look, and others can be devalued. Now, some people say, okay, fine, the belief is important, but when you get rid of the belief, you'll still have the same structures of inequality, and if Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, when it succeeds, you will not still have the same structures of inequality. Because in a democracy, the structures of inequality are based on the actions and the decisions of the people. And the decisions of the people are driven by their core beliefs. Now, I'm going to digress for a moment. Anybody that's heard me speak know I always recommend books that we should read. And I want you to read this book, and I want you to tell everybody you know to read this book. And it's called Rising Out of Hatred. The author's name is Soslow, and the book tells the story of a young man who was groomed to become the heir apparent of the white nationalist leadership, to lead the white nationalist movement. And it is the story of his transformation. Now, make no mistake about it, white supremacy decided to change its brand and become white nationalism, but it's still white supremacy. And this movement, which came right from the Ku Klux Klan and every other racial hate organization, this movement decided it needed to go mainstream, and it needed to be acceptable, to say that white supremacy, white nationalism is important. And so this story is the story of this young man who was raised, he is the son of the former leader of the Ku Klux Klan. His godfather is David Duke, so he was really nurtured up in that belief system. And he was a genius, and he knew how to create websites, and so they built a huge movement over about 5 years. And then he went off to college. Now, when he went off to college, he didn't tell people who he was. But eventually someone found out. And when the campus discovered who he was, these young, vibrant, creative people, they rejected him whole hog. We don't want to have anything to do with the white nationalists. So he felt the sting of his comrades' rejection. But there were 4 people in that group, 4 diverse people, immigrants, Jewish, 1 white, I think 1 black. They decided they would befriend this young man. And they would engage him week after week after week in a dinner. They weren't going to talk about his beliefs as much as just see him as a human being. And through that relationship, through those relationships over time, this young man grew in his understanding and eventually completely disavowed the beliefs that he had been raised with. Now, that was a real shock to his family, and it led to him being partially disowned and all sorts of things. David Duke said he suffered from Stockholm Syndrome. But what he suffered with and from was love and an increase in his understanding. He let go of the ignorance and he embraced the truth. Now, his transformation, to me, reminds us of our work, but more importantly, his story sort of brings home the degree to which this fallacy, this resurgent white nationalism has found its way into our politics and into our world. Now, I know this is a philanthropically funded initiative, and I know some of you are tired of going to meetings and you're trying to figure out what it is. I want you to know that you're part of a national effort that has involved over 150 organizations whose combined reach is almost 200 million people. But most importantly, you're part of the only real counterforce we have to this resurgent adherence to the absurdity of a belief in a hierarchy of human value. Now, when this young man disavowed the belief, he wanted to go off and live anonymously. He even changed his name. But then he was made aware of the harm that he had caused. The website that he had created had given us Dylan Ruth and all manner of others. But then he realized that the website that he had created and the work that he had done and the network that he had helped build and the international conferences that he had designed, that they had actually given us Donald Trump. They had given us a president of the United States who literally espouses the core tenets of this movement of white nationalism. Now, I'm not with the foundation anymore, so I'm being a little more straightforward politically. You all can take that out of the videotape. But as I was reading this, you know, because we don't understand the tenets of white nationalism. I don't go to their websites. But if you read this book, he brings you in. And one of the core tenets is the fear of white genocide, right? No grounding in science or fact whatsoever. But that fear immediately gives rise to permission to close our doors to anybody that's perceived as other. That notion of genetic superiority opens the door to all manner of atrocities and cruelties. And when you have those kinds of beliefs leading our Justice Department, when you have those kinds of beliefs in power, well, I just say to you, there's no more important work for this country to do than the work that you are doing. Do it and do it well. Now, I'm going to briefly, how much more time do I have? I can't see that. What'd you say? 4 minutes? Okay. The framework is truth, racial healing, and transformation is narrative change. Now, narrative change, we've talked about it from the standpoint of changing and telling the truth about our history. I want to remind you that the core narrative that we have to change is the narrative that we are somehow unequal in our value as human beings. We have to say no to that narrative and tell the truth that we are all equal extensions of perfection, of divine perfection. The relationship building and the racial healing work, it's a vehicle to get to that. It's designed in such a way that you learn more about developing empathy and compassion. Self-compassion is where it starts. But those 4 men that turned this young man's mind around, they did it through being empathetic and compassionate and understanding. And they built relationships that mattered to him. And then the final pieces of the framework, the separation, the law, and the economy, that's where we get into the structural aspects. We can't fix it all overnight. You come together as a community and you pick what you're going to work on. And I have a sense that in Chicago, the issues of the law are paramount. But you do it within a framework and a context that understands that absent the public will, absent the public commitment, the changes will not be sustained. We saw that in Washington. We had 25 major accomplishments in this last administration that were moving us toward equity and fairness, and every day another one is reversed because we have not built the public will to value all people equally. So I am humbled and honored. I travel all over this country every day talking to different communities. But I know Chicago's motto is make no small plans. So I say to you here in Chicago, do this and do it well, and show the country that it is indeed possible to jettison the belief in a hierarchy of human value, own the responsibility for the consequences that it had created, and chart a new course for the future that embraces all people equally. Thank you.
Many of us know Monica Helsup already, so if I read her entire bio, then we're going to take up the 45 minutes we have. But let me just say a couple of things. One, because I think it's important to Monica that you all know this, maybe even more so than many other things that we know about her, is she is Alabama bred, which comes with that Southern charm, that Southern care, the Southern hospitality that we all attribute to the South. She certainly embodies it and exudes it. But we know her from her founding of the Little Black Pearl and the evolution of the Little Black Pearl into this comprehensive organization that certainly thinks about the arts as a conduit of human creativity and love, and how to make sure that love is understood and encompasses our being. She also then expanded the Little Black Pearl into a full educational institution and one that continues to evolve and serve its community very well. That's what I'll say about Monica from her bio. There's, again, 2 pages of it. But here's how I know Monica. I've known her from a long time ago when I had a full set of hair. And we were in Seattle at a Marguerite Casey Foundation convening that was about community organizing, essentially about movement building. And I saw her there, and I'm like, well, she's a cool sister. She's somebody that I think I'm going to have to follow in the coming decades. And guess what? A couple of decades later, we're on stage together. We're still hanging out. It was gratifying for me to see you be so involved in this work, to see you in San Diego, but more importantly, to see you in our hometown here in Chicago. I know you have 2 hometowns, just like Dr. Christopher as do I, by the way. I have two hometowns, but this is the primary one now. I want to jump into this conversation with the two of you, but first, Monica, I want to give you the opportunity to just say, why? Why are you so involved, not only locally on this issue of truth, racial healing, and transformation, but nationally? You're a national healer. So you get the first word.
Thank you. Well, I think for me, I was introduced to Gail over a decade ago, and it was a very natural and loving experience. She came to Chicago. We were hosting an event at Little Black Pearl for black men and black boys. And Gail said, "Where did this place come from?" And they called me. I was at home, and I came over, and we walked through the space, and she looked at me and said, "I know what it means to have actually made this happen. I know what this means." And so for me, really that was the first time that somebody from a foundation community had acknowledged that they could see the amount of work that it took to get to that place in my life and in my career. And so she then invited me to learn more about what she was doing with America Healing at the time with Kellogg Foundation, and also invited us to apply to participate. And we applied, and we were funded for our after-school program. And our children really began to get a deeper understanding of how the arts play a role in social change. And that's where my relationship with Gail and the foundation started. And from there, I think that I have learned from her being a mentor to me, but also from looking at myself in this work, how extraordinary love can be. It's funny to me that for years, people have talked to me when I talk about love. They look at me like, really, love is this aesthetic and sort of esoteric thing. But I have really seen the power of it inside my own environment. And I've seen how it has transformed children in a way that it keeps me inspired to go around the country with TRHT, really simply bringing love into the space. That's what I consider my role as a healing practitioner, is just to anchor the space with love so people can trust that they can have the hard conversations.
Thank you. Now you could understand why they're both on stage here today. I hope that feeling and understanding of love rubs off on all of us, especially on me, and that the understanding of the truth that you spoke about earlier, Dr. Christopher, that also is something that gets ingrained in my consciousness as we move forward. I had a bunch of questions written down that I wanted to ask today, but given the issue of the day in Chicago, as the trial continues and the Laquan McDonald case and deliberations are about to begin, it's very possible that a decision in that case will not go in the way that many of the people in this room think it ought to go, and that we have to prepare ourselves as a community in all parts of the city for the consequences of an innocent verdict. So from a truth, racial healing, and transformation perspective, how do we understand this, and how do we importantly prepare for what happens in the coming days, if not the next week or so? And I know that's a tough question. I did check in with them to make sure they were okay with me asking this question. So we've had about 10 minutes to think about it, but this is the question of the day here.
Do you want to start? You're local.
Well, I think that obviously we all are very concerned about this outcome. But I also believe that the work that we're doing with TRHT has a really critical place because of this kind of uncertainty. I think it's an opportunity for us to be prepared to support our community regardless of the outcome. And that means that when we can go into communities and provide a space for people to speak their truth, and to be able to do that where they know that they can have space to listen to others who may not be in agreement, but also dig deep and really understand what they're feeling about the outcome and be able to express that in a space where they are honored. And I think that's going to be necessary regardless of what the outcome is. We need to be able to prepare our community to either deal with the trauma of what is going to be ahead of us, or to begin to be prepared for how we move forward. And all of that begins with building deeper relationships. And how you self-reflect first, and then begin to tell the truth and speak the truth and have that truth heard by the people who need to hear it.
That was eloquent, and I agree with everything that you said. The history of the belief in a hierarchy of human value is weighted with injustice and unfair treatment. It's filled with killings and murders and destruction of people, primarily people of color. And so understanding that the context for both the event and the trial are a reflection of that reality, a reflection of the adherence to the belief in a hierarchy of human value, makes the work that much more urgent, but it also gives a context, I think, that we so sorely need, that depersonalizes it, but makes it personal. You know, I mean, the outcome of this trial is the outcome of this trial, but the context in which it happened is what has to change. Now, you all have done some amazing work already, and you did it, the consent decree, the policing attitudes and behaviors, and that you're just a microcosm of what's going on all over the country. But it just drives home, I hope, the urgency, and it hope whatever happens will ignite in this community the commitment to being healed and to being whole, and to making sure that all lives are valued going forward.
Okay, so I want to follow up with that, because I think the outcome of this trial, again, if it goes in the non-guilty way, is going to create a lot of anger out in community, and it's also going to obviously going to hurt many people in this room. And while that's the outcome, and that immediate feeling, it's easy to understand, the context is a little bit harder for people to get in the moment that they are angry. So for me now, and for many of us, I would assume, it's trying to understand, so how do we make sure that we could communicate the broader message of context and the continued work towards change in a moment where people are feeling anger and hurt? And that's kind of, we would love your perspective and advice on that.
You're all right now. Take it home, my goodness. And I'm also going to turn to Monica, because Monica has dealt with these things in real time, as have I on other levels. The undergirding principles of the racial healing work have to do with emotional self-regulation and emotional self-compassion, and the development of empathy and the capacity to be engaged with honesty and truth and humility with another human being. The feelings of anger are natural, and ultimately they come from the perception that I have no control over the situation. And so part of responding is both the affirming of the emotion, the affirming of the experience, the touching, the holding in unison or in partnership with the grief, but also asserting agency and control. And the most debilitating aspect of these experiences is the perception that I am helpless. And so whatever we can do to disavow that perception, to demonstrate our agency and our power, that's part of what's necessary in terms of responding, but I'll certainly turn it over to Monica.
I mean, I agree. I think that obviously all of us are already carrying the stress of what might come. And I think that, you know, where this work is really important is that we have the opportunity to start now and to move through whatever issue arises. So it's not in response to a particular thing. It is the continuation of the work that we're doing ongoing. And so I believe that the fact that we are here and we are preparing to mobilize and figure out how to move this work into the community is the first step to being prepared for whatever the outcome might be. Because this work is not like a sprint, you know, it is a marathon. And it's something that we're gonna do consistently, and it's gonna take time to actually see the progress. And in that, we're gonna encounter many situations like this. And because of our consistency, I believe we build and fortify the community in a way that we can continue to stay focused, because I think there's a bit of an intention for distraction that allows us to get off track every time something comes up. But the more we are anchored in our belief that we are going to get rid of the hierarchy of human value, we can continue to move forward in spite of what is happening around us.
And if I could only add the narrative of this situation, I would call upon everybody in this room to express a true narrative of this situation, to talk about it within a broader context, to create a narrative that asserts the equal value and contextualizes the system that allowed this to happen. Every moment like this allows us an opportunity to vocalize and express a true narrative, an authentic narrative that embraces the continuum. And we don't want to miss that opportunity. We also want that narrative to end with our sense of agency and our sense of taking control in a way that moves us forward and positively toward our goal. So express I'm not a social media person. I used to say that, but now I actually tweet. So be on that space and wherever, but let your voice be an authentic voice of the truth of your value and the value of the people here in this city, all people.
Okay, thank you. That was very helpful. I know we have limited time, but I have another, maybe a little bit of a comment and a question. So, in the Latino community, as the Southwest and, it's the Southwest primarily, Texas all the way through California, as they begin to change and the faces look more and more like mine and yours, there's this temptation that I used to hear about the word, the reconquista, right? The reconquest of that territory that was taken by the United States. And every time I heard that word, I cringe, and it kind of sends chills up my spine, and I get a little bit afraid, because I know that when people say that word or allude to a browning of America, that our white brothers and sisters will become afraid, and there will be some hell to pay for it. So when you talked about the concept of the fear of white genocide, that resonated with me, because is it always the oppressed that have to fear the fear of the oppressor?
No. You're good. You should take that on the road. You're good. Well, first of all, we have to understand that the fear is part of the fear-mongering. It's part of the rhetoric. It's part of the narrative that grows out of the false ideology of race, period, right? Or racial division or racial difference. The truth of the matter is we are all one human family. Our ancestors adapted in the climates in which they evolved, and that's what gave us our superficial differences. And that's why this part of the work is so important. You know how people say, I'm proud to be with my people who are also of African descent? And I am, and Africa, Wakanda forever, was that? Yeah, okay. However, we are all of African descent. We all share a common lineage in terms of mitochondrial DNA to the same mother. The human genome has revealed that there is more differences within the so-called races than there is between them. So we have to just pull the foundation out from under this notion. Now that doesn't mean that there hasn't been decimation, colonialization, colonization, all manner of wrong and evil things that happened along this trajectory. I'm not minimizing those. But the future for us as a human species, I believe, rests in honoring the sacred interconnected nature of humanity. And that is the only way we are going to survive. The consequences of war and hatred and violence and animus, they're too severe to withstand. And so, that's why this work leads with healing. It is not anti-racism work, although, of course, we're saying racism needs to be jettisoned. It is not restorative justice work, as wonderful as that work is. That is a particular way of working in relationship to the criminal justice system. It is not race relations work, which wants us to become more tolerant, because race relations work comes from the hierarchy. I'm gonna tolerate you even though you're different. So it's none of those other things. It is, I think, a reflection of the evolution of our understanding, because most of what has come before still was grounded in the belief that there are all these different races, right? We are one human family, and we are best served by respecting and honoring each other. And that's the path forward. So I hope that answers your question a little bit.
Monica, anything to add?
Well, to add to that, I would just say in this work, what I've learned just myself is the understanding of my own bias. And so that invitation by this work has created an opportunity for me to self-reflect and understand that some of my reactions are a direct result of the pain that I've endured. And once I can identify that and to bring it forth in my own truth, then the fear of it is no longer what it used to be. And so things that I might have resisted in sort of confronting are no longer so big that I can't stand in front of it anymore. Because now I have removed that fear that was sort of anchored by the pain, and relationships that I would normally not have, I have been more open to them. And so because I've been open, things have transformed with those relationships. And I think that that has really been, quite honestly, the reason why I keep doing it, because it's not about me going to facilitate and help other people. It really is me being an active participant in a process that allows me to self-evaluate, but also invite others to do the same in a way that they get to discover their own truth and have a place to speak it, which we rarely get an opportunity to do.
Thank you. The reason this first panel is so important to me is because the work, as Dr. Christopher said earlier, it's kind of early on, it's vague. And what is it really? And I think it's only through these conversations with people who are deeply in the work that you kind of get a more full understanding of what we're trying to do here, not only today, but moving forward. I want to ask you each for a final message to us as we begin the work of looking at the strategic plan moving forward.
I think I want to pick up, Monica, on what you said, because the healing work, the sitting in the circle and connecting with others who are perceived to be different, is really at the heart of the work. It's at the heart of the work because we seldom have opportunities to do that. Our country is very segregated, our communities are very segregated. I can guarantee you, if you sit in a space with 25 other people for 4 hours or more, and the facilitation allows for the authentic sharing of narrative that is unique to each person in that circle, and those circles are made up and comprised of people, ideally, we're all very different, but you want to be intentional about making sure the circles are very diverse. You leave there in a different space, emotionally and psychologically. Our eyes are opened. And as Monica said, we begin to question our own biases, we begin to reflect. We also have more honest cultural humility. Some of you have heard of the concept cultural competence. I don't particularly like that concept because I think it comes from the hierarchy and it believes that I can go take a weekend course and I can become competent in somebody else's culture. And that's just not possible, right? But the closer I am to other people whose cultures might be different from mine, I can become more humble and I can develop more cultural humility and I can give myself permission to keep learning and to not be offensive. And if I am offensive, to allow myself to be checked in that offense so that I have an opportunity to grow. Because we're all on a journey. We've all, consumed the Kool-Aid. Nobody in this room is without bias. So my parting words to you would be engage, connect, demonstrate the love that we've all been blessed to receive, because we've all received a lot of love, and be in a position to extend that love to others rather than to project our biases onto others. Thank you.
I would probably just from a local perspective say that this moment is a really important moment for us in Chicago. For those of us who are believers and folk who believe that things are possible, this is the moment that we have to balance the narrative, you know, and the balance happens with the good intention. You know, there is no perfection, so we never really always get it right. But I think the fact that our intentions are good and we want to demonstrate that there are many of us who believe that the hierarchy of human value is what is causing the greatest challenge for us in our community. And we should fight as hard for that belief as those who are fighting on the other side. And so we have many tools in our toolbox. I think we should honor every tool as being its own thing, and we should use every single one we have to do the work we got to do.
Thank you both. We're down to our very last couple of minutes. Technically, we're supposed to end now. Listen, I just want to say thank you for your attention. I have, Monica Helsip has channeled you, Dr. Christopher, to me. So I feel like I know you better than I actually do because of her. So one of the things that she said, I don't know, months and months ago, that I continue to repeat, and I've repeated to some of you all, is that whole concept of storytelling. It says that the shortest distance between two individuals is a story, and we have to pick the stories wisely also in having the balanced context, especially in this moment in this city, but then also choose the true stories as we build the context. So I want to thank you both for your time. It was extraordinary. I feel blessed to have been on this stage with you, and thank you for staying with us throughout the day, and I look forward for each of you to have a conversation with Monica and Dr. Christopher. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.